Hi, everyone. Welcome to You're Probably Getting Screwed Book Club. I'm Justin Stofran, really excited to be talking to reporter Adam Chandler about his new book, 99% Perspiration. Adam also writes the Crunch Wrap on Substack, which you should go check out. But Adam, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to folks.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. My name is Adam Chandler. I'm a journalist and author. My first book, Drive Through Dreams, was sort of the cultural history of America told through fast food and post-war America. And my most recent book is called 99% Perspiration, which is all about the culture of work in American life. And a lot of it has to do with these big themes of your newsletter. So this is an exciting thing to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, again, excited to have you. What was uh, the inspiration for the book, and what sort of is kind of the big picture takeaway you hope readers will have?
Sure. Well, for me, writing a book about fast food, that was my first book. I spent time traveling the country, and I would meet these franchise owners and corporate executives who had this belief, is sort of an article of faith in the fast food industry that if you work hard, you'll succeed and you'll become wealthy and you'll own 10 McDonald's. All you have to do is really kind of put as much effort as you can into it. And these are the kind of stories that we cherish in American life, right? Starting on the fryers in 1970 for $1.25 an hour and working your way up. And on the other side of the counter, you have workers, modern fast food workers, who have no shot at that kind of social mobility. And I thought that it's a really interesting way to kind of look at how we think about opportunity in American life. And so that's what spawned this second book, which for me is sort of a curious dig into how we became this country that's so obsessed with work, why we work more hours than other countries, take less time off, move more for work, and make all of these sacrifices for our jobs and our careers. And what's that compensating for? I think that's really what the book is about, the social cost of work. And one of the big takeaways is just the amount of suffering on the personal and community level that we sort of tolerate because we believe so strongly in this individualistic way. And hearing stories and traveling around the country and meeting different people doing important jobs from construction to teaching to mayors to generals, it's fascinating to kind of hear what what comes up in those conversations about opportunity and about equal access to the social mobility that we so cherish.
When in reading the book, I often thought about a question that I get asked in my work, which is often, what can I as a consumer do to help address consolidation and monopoly power? And I often, somewhat jokingly, respond to that question saying nothing. And it's not to be, disparaging or to be cynical. It's that we didn't shop our way into this problem. It's a policy problem. And I think about this book in sort of a similar vein that you can put in all the elbow grease and sweat equity that you want, but if you are confronting these structural issues, and we're not addressing those, it's not going to matter. Is that a sort of a fair takeaway from from part of this book?
Absolutely. There is so much about the American way that focuses on individual aspiration and individual destiny and individual fate. If you fail to make it in the land of opportunity, it's because you didn't try hard enough. And that is, again, another article of faith. It's that you didn't have the character, the elbow grease, the grit to get where you needed to go. And that's a really dangerous line of thinking because it takes all of the pressure off of the structural components and obstacles that people face: corporate concentration, higher cost of living, all of these things that feed into each other, the cost of healthcare, the cost of education, and they make it an individual issue when it is a structural issue. And it creates an immense amount of anger and shame around not getting ahead or staying ahead in American life. It makes it as though it is completely your fault. And that is how we get such an angry, divisive, polarized environment that we're trying to navigate our way through. It's easy to scapegoat people. It's easy to point to undocumented immigrants or so-called lazy people for dragging the economy down or not participating in the labor market when the reality is that these structural obstacles um, are what's really at the root of so much agony that people are facing when it comes to the American dream.
It makes me think there's a state legislator I work with a lot here in Minnesota who had said that the pitchforks are out and for justifiable reasons, but we need to get them pointed in the right direction. And too often they're sort of pointed amongst ourselves as opposed to at these structural forces. So I appreciate that. Um, Given the themes that we often cover at the newsletter, I wanted to focus a little bit or a chunk of our time on one chapter of your book in particular called Fording the River, Big Business and the Frontier Mirage. And I'll start there. There's a couple different components of this chapter that I find really interesting and fascinating, but I want to start, and hopefully I'm not mispronouncing this, but you can correct me, with the story of the Lassus family, who, despite their success in the cannabis industry, are confronting a market that's rapidly consolidating and already went through the experience of being sort of pushed out of the convenience store industry by major chains. So, could you just tell us a little bit more about the Lastus family and what you learned chatting with them there in Oklahoma?
Absolutely. Well, the story sort of begins with I'm looking for a classic American entrepreneur that still kind of represents that quintessential American story of striking out on your own in a new industry and creating something. And I meet this 24-year-old entrepreneur. His name's Arshad Lassi, and he's an immigrant. His family moved over from India when he was 9, and he starts out in grocery stores, sorry, convenience stores and gas stations with as the family business. And he's, a young kid working for a family business, filling up ice bags in the back. It's that kind of you hear that on a stump speech and your heart swells, right? That's such a natural part of the American story. You know that this guy's going to succeed because he's been taught from day one what the value of hard work is. And his family eventually finds that it's unsustainable to work in convenience stores and gas stations because of corporate concentration, because of the fact that there are enormous companies like QuickTime and or Quick Trip, sorry, in Oklahoma that are, you know, cutting them on price and making it so that they can't compete. And this is a small mom and pop gas station operation, and they've been moving around the country trying to find a foothold here. And it's one of those stories that, really makes you question the environment that we're trying to produce and entrepreneurs and innovation and social mobility, and that they ultimately find their way into the cannabis industry just as it's getting started in Oklahoma, which is always funny to me because I can't imagine. I grew up in Texas. The idea of legal cannabis in Oklahoma just blows my mind. But they get in on the medical marijuana industry just as it's getting off the ground, and they manage to create a business that's very popular and very successful. And it's a great story of somebody catching a foothold and succeeding, but if they had come in any later, they would have lost. And so they're finding the success. And they're zooming out, there's a business story here about what our values are broadly, and that is Arshad Lassi, that this young entrepreneur is in business school while this medical cannabis operation is taking off. And the story that he tells me is, I ask him, what didn't you learn in business school that you had to learn, running a small business off the ground? And he says, I didn't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't teach you that stuff at business school. There are black and white things that are basic to running a business. And what you're often told, what many business students are often told, is not to think of a small, sustainable business that you can scale slowly and surely, gaining employees and expanding, but to dream up a billion-dollar moonshot idea that will get you acquired in a short period of time, get you a lot of cash, or acquired, become stockholder trophies, and whatever else it is. Those are the values, or the sort of pathways to success that are being privileged at some of the better and most more well-known business schools out there. And that's another question of values and priorities and essential sort of questions about what American business is meant to be in the 21st century. And it's alarming on a lot of levels. He's going to succeed because you just believe that it's going to work out for him. But there are so many obstacles that he has to face on a basic level to get there.
On that timing sort of piece of the story makes me think of some of the discussions I've had with our members in my day job who are doing all sorts of really exciting, innovative things. But then as you talk to them and you ask a question like, well, what would you say to other folks looking to get into agriculture or get into this specific segment of the industry? They're kind of like, oh, I don't know. I'm fortunate that I got in when I got in and have, sort of found my niche. So certainly other kinds of stories like that out there. Another part of this chapter is discussing, the Gilded Age, or is referred to more in the book, the frontier era. And you write, quote, in 1890s America, demography was fast changing, economic disparities were sweeping and destabilizing, corruption and patronage were rampant, and politics were radicalizing. Boy, that sounds like it could be written today as well. And so I'm wondering what you think we can learn from the history of that era.
Right? We absolutely have these points throughout history that Um, in the book, I try to focus on the things that resemble this period in terms of the despair and the inequality, but there are also moments where we manage to sort out how to instill or implement guardrails and regulations and protections and safeguards for people. Um, Families, businesses, communities, and those are the answers. It took the muckrakers of the early 1900s, and it took a whole wide sweeping sort of platform of new regulations for people to be able to feel safe, to be protected, to not be ejected from their homes. And it still happened, but again, we managed to minimize the damage. And we've had these moments, these kind of breaking points throughout history where we've seen how much people are struggling and we've managed to invest in them and we've managed to protect them. And it's made a huge difference. You know, the GI Bill is an example of something that I think if we tried to implement it today, people would call it a handout. But that, in the way that we look back on that era, it's romanticized. We electrified rural areas, and that was a big part of recovery after um, the Great Depression. After the Civil War, we had the Freedmen's Bureau. We had all of these things that were meant to support people, to bring them into the economy, to educate them, to have healthier and safer communities, because those things lead to a more durable and dynamic economy. And we can make those connections in history looking backward, but for whatever reason we have this amnesia around in thinking about, again, our individualistic ways are so ingrained in our policy and in our culture that the idea of giving people the tools to be socially mobile is sort of anathema here in a way that is bizarre, given how many times in history we've seen everyone just kind of face these enormous challenges and lose nearly everything. And then we have to act after the fact, after great suffering has happened, to do the right thing or some version of the right thing, even the smallest version of the right.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that kind of powers me in this work, in a but maybe sometimes a weird way, is that as frustrating as these moments can be, we have this history of like taking on these different challenges, and I think about uh, the importance of breaking up concentrated corporate power, particularly as a pillar of the New Deal, and the idea that policy was a part of building the middle class that we used to have, and that sort of thing seems to get lost or twisted or transformed. Um, Another part of the history that you highlight, that's also plenty relevant today, is corporate, what we would call today corporate subsidies, sort of in the amidst this backdrop. It's the railroads and sort of the land grants and the loans and the government backed bonds that they received. I think about Elon Musk, who is often held up as like, oh, the self-made, richest man in the world, who's received tons and tons and tons of money in government funding. I'm wondering how you think about that sort of dynamic, and how it plays into kind of the broader theme of the book.
Absolutely. It is fun to look back and despairing to look back on how much of these historic characters resemble each other, call out to each other, and want to emulate each other. Edison is um, Elon Musk's hero, and he says at one point, I named my car Tesla after Edison's rival, but really I liked Edison more because Edison brought products to market. That was the most important thing. And Edison himself said, selling something is its proof of utility. There's no point in inventing something if you can't sell it. And those are classic American themes, but the way that they also interact is they are held up in our society, in our culture, as these singular geniuses. And the reality is that they benefited from us. They benefited from everyone, taxpayer funded research and grants, and our education system, and our roads and our schools. They benefited from all of those things. And obviously, uh, Elon Musk has less of a hold on the idea of the sort of rags to riches story. He, inherited a bunch of money from his dad, who owns an emerald mine, and got $38 billion in government contracts. So it's not as if he was out there starting from the very beginning and working his way up. He started out on third base and acts like he hit a triple. It's that kind of story that we're used to, but he's held up as this individualistic model, because that's what we like to do. We like to focus on those stories. Even though, if you look back at Edison, the light bulb is a great example of an invention that happened not just because of him, but because of research around him and people around him. Um, Lewis Latimer is the person who invented the carbon filament inside a light bulb. He's a Black American inventor whose name is not even remotely as famous as Edison's. But the only reason why the light bulb became this life-changing invention was because it was affordable enough because of this filament to be accessible to the masses. And we tend not to focus on the teams and the communities that build success here. We'd like to say it's an individual effort, it's an individual sport, and it's to our detriment. We should be prouder. We should feel some sense of ownership over the things that happen as a result of all of our collective efforts. And that part of the story gets written out because it doesn't quite fit what we're hoping to say.
Well, speaking of communities, towards the end of this chapter, you sort of close the chapter talking about Black Wall Street, or the Greenwood district in Tulsa, and how that community existed in part because of the racism and exclusion that existed at that time. And um, I don't think it's any secret that we at the newsletter are big baseball fans. It made me think of the Negro Leagues and the economic ecosystem that built up around the Negro Leagues, because of the color barrier there, and how integration and the way it was handled actually ended up resulting in the demise of the Negro Leagues and that business community. But the reason I flag those two examples is that it makes me think about how important it is to give communities the ability to build their own wealth and power, not have to be reliant on outside forces. But I'm wondering how you think about, particularly that Tulsa example.
Right. The one of the major tragedies of the attack on the Greenwood District and on Black Wall Street in Tulsa, aside from the fact that literally nobody was held to account, we're still unraveling the fact that there was essentially no investigation or any consequences for the people who attacked this community. Was that the community was vibrant, and it embodied the American dream that we're so obsessed with. They built this community where a dollar passed through the community 26 times before it left, because of the infrastructure that they built up, because of the work that the community did to be self-reliant and self-sustaining, which again are all of these enormous, big, brash American themes of of creating businesses and infrastructure. And they did it, yes, because they had been excluded from a lot of other businesses. Segregation was one of the key drivers of the creation of this successful enterprise, a successful community, and it created a lot of resentment from other people, which ultimately led to its demise. Um, and it's such a fascinating story because when you look back at the archives, and there are some really beautiful museums and features in the community that focus on what it looked like and what businesses were around and how it sort of provided um, finances and resources for each other to be again socially mobile, but also just feel supported. Um, it was a really beautiful concept of what a community could and should look like that was ultimately crushed. And so, if you ever find yourself in Tulsa, I highly recommend going to Greenwood on top of. There's so many things about that section of the country where you have Route 66 and you have the Dust Bowl. You have all of these sort of strange historic markers of things working out, things not working out, destruction, opportunity, oil, economic isolation, all of these big themes just kind of coalesce in this one small area. And Greenwood is one more piece of the puzzle. But looking at that, you just think, wow, interdependence is a takeaway in so many of the stories of success in American life. It's not individual achievement, it's people relying on each other and benefiting from that, and collectively the pie growing because everyone is succeeding, as opposed to it being a blood sport where the individual has to succeed and you succeed at the detriment to everyone around.
Absolutely. Towards the or sort of in closing out the book, you write, we haven't lived up to our democratic equalizing values, not yet at least. And then you also add, the answer isn't to give up on these values, it's to finally make them true. You also write, the social and political upheaval of the pandemic years has to be our 21st century breaking point, an opportunity to construct a viable American dream. You've touched on some of this, but sort of where do we go from here?
It's a great question. A lot of it focuses on, it has to focus on community. It has to focus on the reality that everyone needs something from the people around them, and that work has overtaken the connections that we have to our friends and our family and the people around us. And we're diminishing returns. And we need to ask why. And we need to rely on each other to advocate for each other. These are they sound almost Pollyannish, but these are features of other societies where people don't slip through the cracks, where medical debt isn't the number one cause of personal bankruptcy, or baby formula isn't one of the most shoplifted items. These are parts of the American life that we tend not to talk about because it's proof that in a lot of ways, our work hard mentality isn't true. The mythology around all of these things isn't true. And so we have to support each other. We have to be um, give people the tools to be socially mobile if we're going to be so obsessed with social mobility. And there's so many different ways that this plays out on the small and grand scales.
Well, Adam, I really appreciate you taking the time. Congrats on the book. Is there before we close out though, is there anything about the book that we haven't touched here that you want to make sure to plug in our last couple of minutes?
Well, specifically, I mean, for your very smart audience, one thing that struck me about the dream jobs part of the equation is the reality. There's in the book, I do a lot of research, and one of the things that jumped out to me is a study that looked at how of the Forbes 500, sorry, of the Fortune 500 companies that existed in the year 2003, over 50% of them were gone by 2020. So in just 20 years, 52% of these Fortune 500 companies were gone. To acquisitions, to being sold for parts, takeovers, whatever it is. And so we think about the struggle around work as being mostly a lower income wage issue, or the equality and an inequality of our systems not working the way. But this is the kind of thing that affects everyone. We're beyond the 25 years in gold watch period with pension. We are now in an era where even if you have what you would consider to be a dream job, your life is not secure without the safeguards that keep people again steady and supported and empowered to demand better and to be safe when terrible things happen. And it is highly possible that we are headed towards more rough times. I think it's safe to say that that's going to happen. And we really need to rely on each other. And a lot of the book is about finding those ways into it. And obviously, you're a tremendous resource for that kind of um, camaraderie that is so important to us getting through the next few years intact. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful to talk to you about it. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's maybe the unifying theme in a dark, twisted way is we're all getting screwed. But
Right.
I think it also means that we're all in this together, right? And uh, these fights. I think about something that now former Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust Jonathan Cantor told me, which is, a fight over in this corner on a tech issue means something for farmers down the line, and vice versa. And these fights are unifying in that way, because, yeah, again, to your point, we can't do it alone. We have to stick together. Well, Adam, thank you again. Make sure we've had links in the newsletter. Go to your favorite local bookstore, or as Adam very helpfully pointed out, go to your local library and find the book. You can find Adam both on Substack. He also has a personal website that I believe is adamchandler.com. Do I have that right? Where you can
That's right.
find some of his other writing in various places. I would highly recommend that. So again, Adam, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.